Just like the wide-winged dove sings a song, sounds like she's singing. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Just like the wide-winged dove sings a song, sounds like she's singing. Ooh, baby, ooh, say ooh. And the days go by like a strand in the wind, in the web that is my own. I begin again. Said to my friend, baby, nothing else mattered. He was no more than a baby then. Well, he seemed broken hearted, something within him. But the moment that I first laid eyes on you, I'm all alone on the edge of 17. Just like the wide-winged dove sings a song, sounds like she's singing. Ooh, baby, ooh, ooh. Just like the wide-winged dove sings a song, sounds like she's singing. Said ooh, baby, ooh, said ooh. Well, I went today, maybe I will go again tomorrow. Yeah, yeah, well, the music there, well, it was hauntingly familiar. Well, I see you doing what I tried to do for me with a words on it, poet, and a voice on it, fire, and a melody. And nothing else mattered.
Military victory or defeat can depend on the weather. A commander who can control the weather has a weapon as powerful as any air force. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. military began seeding clouds along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to create floods and wash out North Vietnamese supply routes. It was known as Operation Popeye, and crews flew over 2,000 spray missions.
I was told initially by a friend, he said his brother was in the military service. He said when there is these heavy spray days, heavy days when there's lots of persistent contrails to keep his family inside, when they were outside exposed, to have them go in and take showers. And he couldn't talk about it. He couldn't explain more than that.
We have extensive studies that the civilian aircraft, the airliners, were laying plumes that basically dissipated within seconds to 2 minutes. The military aircraft in the same airspace laid plumes lasting 4 to 8 hours. The weather conditions are the same. The plumes are entirely different. One is civil and one is military. Something is going on.
Dave Dickey also believes the U.S. military is behind a lot of the chemtrail activity. He claims to have seen 2 very suspicious contrails while touring a civilian airport.
It was actually the day we spotted 2 aircraft, 2 KC-135s, and it was call sign Petro 011 and Petro 012. The air traffic controllers were kind of showing us how the tower worked, and they identified these 2 aircraft as 2 American military KC-135s. And what we could see was a contrail. We couldn't see the aircraft. It was just amazing to watch the grid patterns that the KC-135s were leaving.
People who research chemtrails are convinced there's a conspiracy underway to change the weather.
This perfect storm. The debate is over around climate change. Just come to the state of California. Observe it with your own eyes. It's not an intellectual debate. It's not even debatable.
The debate is over around climate change. The debate is over around climate change.
California's rogue governor says the fires are due to climate change. But anyone with a modicum of awareness knows that this is an outrageous lie. We know exactly what causes the California wildfire. It is the result of 2 factors: dry seasons and people.
People living in these dense cities largely do not own cars. Well, what they are doing is they are converting the transportation system and the development program such that all new development for the next 25 years must be within a half a mile of what they call transit-oriented centers.
It is frightening to see how much of America's land has recently been consumed as a result of this agenda. For instance, the state of Florida utilized the data from GAP to implement an aggressive preservation plan called Florida Forever. Since the early 1990s, over 2 million acres in the state of Florida have been locked up through this program. The private property owners within the target area were forced to give up their land under the pressure of extreme environmental regulations, purchase, and outright condemnation. And the Florida Forever campaign is not complete. At the current rate that environmentalists are implementing their agenda in every state, in every county, and soon in every town, private property is quickly being eliminated. Environmentalists have scared Americans into thinking that if we continue to live as we are today, the earth will self-destruct, species will die, and the globe will be covered with development. However, government data shows that only 6% of America's landmass is currently developed. Only 3% of America is classified as urban, yet 77% of all Americans live in these urban areas. The rest is still largely untouched by humans. The problem is not that our nation is being overdeveloped. The problem is as old as time. It is about who will own the land. Large amounts of the nation's natural resources are still owned by private citizens. America's founders vehemently opposed the concept of government or elitists owning the land in America, which would result in the citizens being leaseholders and serfs. One of the most well-known property rights advocates of our time, Wayne Hage, said it best. Either you have the right to own property or you are property. Karl Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto, "The theory of the communist may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property." America's founding father, John Adams, stated, "Property must be secured or liberty cannot exist." Which course will America take?
At around 9:45 p.m. on Sunday, October 8th of 2017, the Tubbs Fire began in Northern California. And by the time the sun came up, over 1,000 homes were destroyed. Videos and photographs show how this so-called forest fire seemed to spare the wild and somehow jump from house to house. CNN reported that the so-called forest fire jumped to the freeway. Hundreds of photographs show cars with melted trails of aluminum alloys from what must have been an unprecedented amount of power. The average forest fire burns at 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Aluminum alloys will melt at temperatures between 1,200 and 2,000 degrees, but many of these cars were nowhere near a forest fire. Some cars were flipped over. The heat must have been intense. Not only was it able to melt aluminum alloy, but consistently, every home that caught fire was leveled to white, powdery ash in less than 12 hours. By October 31st, the Tubbs Fire had destroyed 5,643 buildings. PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. PG&E was found responsible for 16 of the fires, over $10 billion in damages. All of this while producing $1 billion a year in profits for the Rothschild Investment Group. PG&E warned the public that the fires will not just continue, but will grow larger every season. They warned their investors that future liability will force PG&E into bankruptcy. In June, utility officials told state lawmakers that they needed protection to survive the coming fire season. And on August 31st, California state legislature passed a utility bailout bill to protect PG&E, its shareholders, and Rothschild Investment. At sunrise on Thursday, November 8th, the Camp Fire wildfire began in California. It has all the same anomalies as the Tubbs fire and is already twice as devastating. Many people are asking the same question: is this an attack? In 2003, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and General Richard Myers admit to the development of directed energy weapons and microwave technology. In 2017, Lockheed Martin shoots drones out of the sky with an invisible laser beam that burns them from the inside out. The technology exists. The evidence is there. But the motive? Perhaps it can be found in the United Nations Agenda 21, wherein certain areas of the country are proposed to be off limits to human use. It just so happens that these strange California fires seem to all be within the proposed no human use areas. New regulations and insurance policies are preventing homeowners from rebuilding. And meanwhile, they claim it is the new normal and are now claiming it is a phenomenon of global warming. One thing is for certain: the governor of California has already assured that the people will pay for all of the damages.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion,
no.
though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War.
The CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War.
To wash out the Viet Cong. Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive.
And there is nothing new under the sun. People today will throw away their children's birthright because of ignorance, faith in false idols, and their blatant lies.
In the shower, I use a water-activated gel cleanser.
Just